If we get lucky, I forgot it. Good afternoon. First of all, thanks for inviting me, and I really appreciate that. The old World War II guys are getting our stories out before it's too late, and so we get to history classes a lot and find out how well organized and how much you really know about what's happening, and maybe I can add a little bit to that. First of all, I want to say that I brought some of my family today. My wife Donna back there with one of their hands. My son Jim, the guy with the camera, and Kevin Callahan, who does videos. He's filmed thousands of veterans, Koreans in Vietnam and so forth, to get their stories was genuine from the guys that did it, the guys that were there. It's up on the internet, you're going to live forever. Finally. Okay. Well, 40 years after World War II, I received a phone call. The guy on the line said, "This is Goonie." Goonie, I said, "A lot of my friends are Goonie. You got to go deeper." He said, "This is David Davis. I was a navigator on a B-17 in World War II, flying out of Italy. You were the tail gunner." Goonie was my nickname. I said, "David, you died in that plane crash. We were in a terrible, terrible plane crash. They hauled you away, you were toast." He said, "The rumors of my death are greatly exaggerated." He said, "I was in the hospital for months with skin grafts and blood transfusions. In fact," he said, "a Russian kid lay down beside me and gave me blood. Now I'm a Russian Jew." Well, I said, "How'd you find me? And why?" Well, he said, "I'm having dinner with my daughter, and I'm telling her how I got all these scars over the lower part of my body. And I'm telling her about the crew. There are 10-man crew on a B-17. And I'm telling her about this character of a tail gunner from Ortonville, Minnesota, which happened to be me." And she said, "Dad, call him. Call him after all this time?" So I found your sister-in-law over in Big Stone, South Dakota, and she led me to you. And so that inspired me to search for my crew. I found 5 of them that I put in my home out of Stillwater for the reunion. And another one, the radio guy, gunner, was wounded severely on one of our missions. And we went down to his home in Arizona to be with him for 2 years in a row. There's no way to explain how close you can become with people that have lived together under the circumstances that we did. And when I got these guys in, they landed at the airport out here, and we were 62 years old at that time, after that 40 years, and we're jumping around in McDonald's and hugging each other. These guys are crazy. And we were crazy, and we enjoyed being crazy. So anyway, now, where are we going to go? Oh yeah, I mentioned, we were in our early 60s. Now I am the only one left. And because they say 400 of us are dying a day, this gentleman back here's job is to capture us before it's too late. Well, not long ago, do you have DVDs that you can? Yeah. Okay. Not long ago, I got a phone call from the Metro North television station. And they say, "We would like to interview you because you are one of the last of the World War II guys and we need to capture your story." So they came out to my house. They set up these big expensive cameras. They put me in a chair and they interviewed me for about 3 hours. And they wrapped it up and left. Then they went to a friend's house, a Navigator. They didn't fly on my plane, but it's a good friend of mine, and we go out and make speeches to history classes. And they went to his house. And they interviewed him. And they put this all together in a DVD, which I have right here. It runs about 25 minutes, and it's experiences in World War II. You'll see some pictures of us when we were very, very young and handsome, like this group right here. And now I'm out of here while he turns on the film.
This group?
I will hold this down quick.
Excuse me.
There. That commercial lights off, yeah.
Well, I was born actually on a riverboat in St. Paul that my grandma lived on the Mississippi, so that's where I was born. Graduated from high school in White Bear in 1942 and then entered the Army Air Force in November of 1942.
I was born in Ortonville, Minnesota. It's on the border with South Dakota, straight west of here. I was born on November 14th, 1925. I'm 87 years old. I had a twin sister, and my dad had a meat market, and he came up to the hospital, and when he went back to the market, he got a phone call. We got another one up here. The day the bomb dropped on Pearl Harbor, I just turned 16, and I was out northeast of my hometown of Ortonville hunting jackrabbits. I had to quit my senior year of high school. I never graduated from high school. I went to work in his meat market. I was 70, 80 hours a week. I was carrying quarters of beef and butchering cows and scalding hogs. I could hardly wait to get in the war.
Way back when I was a kid, I decided that I wanted to fly, but I knew that there was no chance because it was too costly. Because I grew up in the Depression and we were very, very poor. And so when the war came along, I thought, boy, here's my chance. I'm going to go in the Air Force.
Finally, I enlisted, and I wanted to be a fighter pilot. Every kid in America, I think, wanted to be a fighter pilot.
You took a test, and that test classified you as bombardier, navigator, or pilot. Those were the officers on the bomber crew, and they classified you with scores of 1 to 9. I was fortunate enough to get a 9 on all 3 of them. So they did let me pick.
I flunked the physical. When I was a kid, I was climbing a tree and collecting eggs out of birds' nests, and I fell and broke this arm. I had a compound fracture. I can't lay this hand flat. And the doctor says, we'll offer you limited service. You can drive a truck or you can type. And I said, I want to be a fighter pilot. I said, I'm sorry, soldier, it has to go on your record. My basic training was in Keesler Field, Biloxi, Mississippi. And you come to the parade grounds from all over America, soldiers, just kids. The kid from Texas was mean-looking, tall. And the kid from Boston couldn't speak the language. It was a bottle with a metal cap. It was a bottle with a metal cap. The kid from Arkansas, his brogue was so you couldn't understand him. And the farm boy from Clascanine, Oregon, had buck teeth. It was a strange-looking kid. All of a sudden, the sergeant yells, "Attention!" Hup! We're at attention. We no longer focus on each other. We're doing push-ups and sit-ups. And the kid from Texas helped me carry my backpack when I could hardly stand. And the kid from Clascanine, Oregon, was standing, trying to figure out ways to take him down. And now we were buddies. We're no longer looking at each other as kind of freaks. We were together. And that was the purpose of basic training, to shape us up and ship us out. Well, one day my buddy, his name was Bud Riley, came to me, and he was dangling a $20 bill. And he said, "Parker, we're rich." His mother had tucked it in the folds of a letter. And she began to write twice a week, and there was always a 20 in Parker. We were wealthy. We'd go to town and we would ride horseback, and we'd go to the gambling shows. We even went to a girly show. The next phase of our training was down in Tennessee. We got together as a crew, so we learned how to drop bombs out of the Gulf of Mexico. We simulated bomb drops. And one day over Dyersburg, Tennessee, I was firing my machine gun at some gas cans that were on a barge. And it was fun watching them explode. And I made a mistake. When you fire a machine gun, you fire it in bursts. Brr, brr. If you hold it too long, it'll heat up the breech and the shell will explode. Well, that's what happened to me. In my excitement, I forgot that rule, and they had to take me and give me a tetanus shot when we landed. And I couldn't get the Purple Heart for that. That's how I learned to shoot machine guns, and I eventually ended up as a tail gunner in a B-17.
I got my commission in February of '44, and before the end of the month I joined my crew, the other 9 members of my crew in Sioux City, Iowa. Now that's the first time I'd ever been in a B-17.
I first stepped in a B-17 in Las Vegas, Nevada, gunnery school. It was quite a ride.
Oh, that was something, you know. We went down the runway, and I'm wondering, are we going to get off before the end of the runway? And, you know, we lifted off a long time before we got to the end. And then it seemed like he adapted very rapidly to that airplane, because you knew you were going to be in it for a while.
Now there's a plane right behind me, and that was the model I trained in, but the one I flew in was a little more modern than that one.
That was a miracle then, you know. That was, the IT at that time was fabulous for that time. All the stuff in there was just amazing. I'm thinking this airplane costs $250,000. That was a lot of money in 1944. And I'm thinking, boy, I got to be on the ball here and do a good job getting us to the target and back.
When we were loaded for takeoff in combat, we had 10 crew members, thousands of rounds of ammunition, 12 500-pound bombs, and all our weight was double from and it would start down the runway. Oh, on and on and on, and that plane was just as reluctant to take off as we were.
You just think, well, this is the greatest time in my life to be flying in an airplane like this. And it was such a powerful craft. You know, I had flown in single-engine planes, and then to get into that 4-engine and listen to those engines revved up, 4,800 horsepower. I started flying my combat missions 10 days after D-Day, June 16th, 1944, and finished 50 missions on September 12th, 1944.
November 18th, 1944. We bombed Vienna. We were just coming off the target. We're over Yugoslavia. We were letting down so that we could get off oxygen. Well, just about the time I was going to get off oxygen, I heard, "Get out, get out." And I turned, and here was a B-17 to my right, upside down, in a flat spin. And several parachutes were coming out. And the plane exploded.
First mission was to Wiener Neustadt. It's a suburb of Vienna, Austria, and there was a big oil refinery there, and we went to that. And I remember some of the guys that told me that had flown missions, what did it be like? And I remember seeing the flak, those big black puffs, about 100 miles before we got to the target. And I got on the intercom and said, "What's that?" And the pilot said, the guy that had experience, he said, "That's what you call flak." And the closer we got to the target, the more intense the flak became.
Always over the target. Flak was exploding. Flak took down more aircraft in World War II than fighters. It was terrible stuff. It always hit the aircraft.
Geez, as we got closer to the target, you could walk on it. But they just put a barrage of flak up in the whole area. And I thought, ooh, yeah, this is really something. One of the things on a mission is that about somewhere between 6 and 20 minutes before you drop the bombs, you get to what's called the IP, the initial point. That's where you open the bomb bay doors and the airplane flies straight and level. You don't make any evasive action. The German fighters disappear. They don't want to be in the flak, but the flak is very heavy over the target. They just saturated the area. They necessarily weren't aiming at any airplane, but they knew the height we were flying. And the way they picked that up is the contrails.
They knew our altitude, our airspeed, and they set the fuses on their exploding shells to be right where we were going to be to drop the bombs.
We were over the target, and you know how B-17 is built? It has that Astrodome. And I was standing up looking at that, out of that, because the fire was just horrendous, the flak. And a piece of flak came through and hit my steel helmet and made a dent in it as big as my fist, but did not break through, knocked me down. When I got back, the colonel, the commanding officer of the group, asked me, he said, "Lieutenant, what did you think of this first mission?" And I said, "Colonel, I can tell you I'd make a better lover than fighter."
One day, we bombed a target in northern Italy called Padua. We came off the target, and we were in such bad shape that two engines in the middle of the B-17 were just gone, feathered. The outboard engines were running 3/4 power because their controls were shot out. The pilot was struggling with that aircraft to try to get back to base. Fortunately, we were south of the Alps, and we were pretty close to our base. The engineer called the crew and said, "Get in crash position. We may not have a good landing." So we all went to the radio room, except for those that were needed to fly the aircraft and the engineer, and got in spoon-style position. The pilot lost control of his aircraft, and we drifted into a whole bunch of C-47s, a twin-engine aircraft, kind of the Jeep of the sky. We crashed into the first one, it turned us into the other one, cut it in two. Unfortunately, a guy was killed there. We crashed into all the rest of them, and several were killed on the ground, and several in my plane were in critical condition. I visited them in the hospital. But my pilot destroyed more friendly multiple engine aircraft in World War II than anybody. He was an ace. He destroyed 4 C-47s and a B-17.
Okay, here we are. 9 o'clock high, enemy fighters.
Whenever you're flying over enemy territory and you're being shot at and attacked by fighters, the engineer, the navigator on our crew would call for oxygen check. Starting at the tail, we would all report in to make sure everybody was okay. What I would do is I would wiggle out of the tail, past my ammunition boxes. I was the only one with his own escape hatch. And I would sit there and I'd have my parachute on one link, and I had body armor on, and I had the 23rd Psalm, and reciting that from time to time. I would substitute fear with fantasy. I would look around my ammunition boxes, and my oxygen hose went through a blinker. I could see every breath that I took. It was like a pair of lips. I would fancy that was my girlfriend back home kissing me. It replaced some of the other problems. Well, one day when he called for oxygen check, the radio man didn't answer. We went around again, and one of the waist gunners didn't answer. So the pilot called me. He said, "Parker, what's happening back there?" Well, I could look past the tail wheel, through the waist, into the radio room, and Faust, the radio man, was out cold. Waist gunner was trying to get oxygen into him. His line had been severed, and you can only last 2, 3, 4 minutes, without oxygen. So I yelled to Clemens, "Faust is down, and Patchy's trying to get oxygen into him." He said, "We're going down." The pilot put the aircraft in a paradigm over Vienna. We went from 28 to 12,000 feet, past the danger line, which on a B-17 is 275 miles an hour. Anything can happen after that. We could lose control, maybe an aileron, whatever. And we pulled out, and we saved the the radio man's life, but he was never the same after that. But an interesting thing happened. On the way down, he said, prepare to bail out. Well, I was always ready. There was crazy things happening. And he said, but don't bail out unless you hear the emergency bell. I found out after the war that the circuitry didn't reach the housing in the emergency bell in the tail. I never would have heard that. The guys would have waved goodbye. These are the strange things that happen from time to time.
Probably one of the most interesting missions was in early August of 1944, I flew with the colonel in the lead ship of the 5th Wing in Italy. That was 6 bomb group, 6 B-17 bomb group. And the colonel had been an Olympic diver in 1936 Olympics, and he got to know Axis Sally. Well, we always listened to Axis Sally because she had all the good music, Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey and Jimmy Dorsey and Gene Krupa. Well, we were listening to Axis Sally, and because she knew Colonel Kurtz, she came on and she said, Frankie, we're going to get you today. We know you're going to Budapest, and we're waiting for you. And we're also waiting for that little pink-faced navigator from Minnesota. You know, I looked so young. I looked like a kid with a pink face, you know. And they got a lot of information on us. They hired clipping services, local newspapers. The White Bear Press had a big write-up about me before I went overseas. Now, they didn't know where I was going because I didn't know, but they told a lot about me. I was American, but I am not that confident in all his kite boyfriends who have thrown up his hotel. Her propaganda was very useless. You know, she'd come on and say, you know, you guys ought to go back home and give up because your girlfriends or your wives are running around with guys at home, and you know, it was so illogical. It didn't affect us, but we loved her music. And we joked around a lot under the dire circumstances. One day a shell exploded under the ball turret, and he yelled up, has anybody got any windshield wipers up there? There's dew flowing all over the ball. It was hydraulic fluid. We dropped back, we had lots of damage. The pilot called me, Parker, we may not have brakes and tires, and we need to rig a parachute in the tail. So he had me put a parachute in the tail. There's a little canopy in a B-17, and a little ledge. And all the way in on the landing pattern, he talked to me. We were to use it as a brake. So finally, we're on the landing. You don't need it, so I throw it down. I didn't know what was going to happen. We used up all the runway, no tires, no brakes. We ground looped to the grass and stopped. The plane was a mess. Clancy came back to me and he said, Parker, you did a good job. And I said, Clancy, I didn't do anything. He said, that's what I mean. And, you know, the number of planes was just massive. I was in the 15th Air Force based in Italy. We put up 500 or 600, but the 8th Air Force out of England would put up 1,000. That's bombers without the fighter planes. So it was a massive operation. We just had so much equipment. You fly a mission and 5 or 6 or 7 planes get shot down. There's replacements right there. We had extra engines, extra parts. We just had everything. Plenty of gasoline. The only thing that we didn't have was good food.
One day we took off for a place called Hagen's Home. The ship began to shake. Like a dog, I was just shaking by. I don't know what's going on. I'm just the tail nut back there. The pilot said, prepare to bail out. Well, you know, I was ready for that one. Finally, he called the navigator and he said, we can't get back. Find me a place to land. We landed in a pasture in Yugoslavia. And we rolled to a stop. We all jumped out, but we were in enemy territory. And one kid was on a bicycle. And he was maybe 12, 13 years old. He had a machine gun across his back. And he threw down the bicycle and he ran up to my engineer. And he grabbed him and he said, cigarette, Joel? Cigarettes with the coin of the round. Well, there we were in enemy territory. So the radio man radioed for help. and a C-47 came in, that twin engine. The door flew open, and here's a beautiful nurse and a doctor, and 10 guys are rushing her, she's mine. We pile in, we go back over the Adriatic and land on our base, came into my tent, 6 of us lived in the tent over there in Italy, and the waist gunner wasn't with us that day. We had bumped him for a photographer, and he was crying. He'd heard that he'd lost his crew, and here we were.
The Air Force didn't do the whole job. The men on the ground, the men on ships, everybody did a great job. And we all worked together. It was a very cooperative effort.
Left Italy July 6th in 1945. I landed in the United States in Bakersfield, Maine, July 12th. I jumped out of that bomber and I got down and I kissed America. I think the best part of my experiences in World War II was the fact that it changed me drastically. I left home as a kid and came back, and now my dad, I wasn't his little boy anymore. And he wanted to know where I'd been the last couple of years.
I think my dad again made the comment that fit. He said you left home as a boy and you came back as a man. During that short period of time in combat, you begin to look at the world far differently, much more mature. You know, you walked on the street before that and you met people and you said hello to them. Now you're in an airplane where you got guys on the ground shooting at you and fighter planes coming at you trying to kill you, and you're trying to kill them. It makes your mind change in such a hurry that it's very unusual. I don't think usually in life we can change that rapidly.
All of us were just little bits of history. We really were inside of history. Didn't really realize we were making history. And now certainly we'll be history. I'm with them all the time, so they haven't left me. And the older you get, the closer you get to these things. You know, you come home from the war, you put it behind you. You get married and you have kids and get a job and you do it in that order, as crazy it seems. And then finally, what happens is you grow up in a free country, a little bit of your own making. It's hard to explain how close we were. They're all gone now. I'm the only one. My best friend, Bud Riley. He was in basic training with me. He was in Army school with me. Now Bud and his brother-in-law were in the same aircraft, which was a kind of a taboo, you know, and when the Sullivan boys went down there. So, over Linz, Austria, February 25th, Bud's plane got hit. And it dropped down to about 2,000 feet, and there was a terrible fire, it exploded. Bud was killed. His brother-in-law survived. Whenever I put out the flag on special days, I look up and I see Bud, and he's dangling a $20 bill at me. He said, "Parker, we're rich." And I always have to say, yes, we are rich. And because of all the Bud Rileys down through the ages, we're free. It's still the same old story. The 8th gets all the glory. The 15th has to die. You must remember this. That bullets don't always miss. Somebody has to die. The odds are always too damn high when those fights go by. Now 110s and 210s knocking at your gate. Come on, aerial gunner, shoot down a certain rate. Come on, bombardier, salvo, don't be late, the target's passing by. It's still the same old story. The 8th gets all the glory. The 15th has to die.
Off here. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes left in class, so
Okay.
We have been talking this week about combat and what it's like to experience combat and what soldiers go through and what goes through in your mind. We've been talking about everything from the food to the weather to everything. Could you comment about just your combat experiences, how it changes you and how it affects your psyche and whatnot and so on?
What we would do after a mission, we would go back to our tents. And we might have been through some very, very rough things. But we had several things going for us. We had an intercom system that we could report to each other all the time. And we were young, we were your age. I had my first mission when I was 18 years old, so youth had a real helped us quite a bit. These people that go over to Afghanistan, they have families. They go over several times. It might have been a little different situation than what we had. When I went to the hospital to visit my engineer, that fire, he saved several people. He was in critical condition when they hauled him to the hospital, and I went in to visit him. He was all bandaged up, eyes and hands, you know, like you've seen in the movies. And there was a nurse at his bedside with a paper and pencil. And he was dictating a letter to his mother, you know, these telegrams that they send home. He said, "Dear Mom, don't believe all these telegrams you're going to get about me being hurt." He said, "My secretary is writing the letters for me." This is how young we were and the way we responded to some of these terrible things. And then he looked at me. He said, "Parker, they're talking about President Truman. Roosevelt's the president." I said, "Sal, we crashed the day Roosevelt died, April 12th, 1945. And he had no idea of that." When I think about, I think I have more problems with what happened now than I did when it was happening. I've had time to deal with it. I think about my crew a lot. I think about Bud. I see the freckled face, that type of stuff. And so it's really, it comes on in waves. It's just like when you land in fear. It just kind of comes on in waves and it waves away. And then you're involved with stuff. You go back to the dispensary, they give you an ounce of whiskey. They should have given it to us before we went up. And then we go right to the Red Cross truck and we get donuts and we might get a hug from one of those pretty Red Cross girls. All that came to interfere with fear. You might have any questions, but just interrupt me if it. So to answer that question, we had a number of ways to handle it. And, we went back to our tents, we wrote letters a letter took 2 weeks. Nowadays in combat, they pick up the telephone and they call the family. We didn't have that. And things like that. Now you might wonder, the question comes up, did you ever have to fire your guns at an enemy aircraft? Did you ever shoot down a plane? No, but they were there. But they didn't attack the tail for a number of reasons. You probably know I was the best tail gunner in the Air Force. And another reason might be all the swastikas I had painted on the back of the tail. But the truth is, they stopped attacking the tail early in the war. It was too dangerous. Fighters would come out of the sky and come in the pursuit curve, and here's the bomber, and they had to get in. The deflection had to be perfect to get a shot at it, like you were hunting ducks. And everything happened fast in there. Well, the tail gunner could shoot at them 600 yards. They had to get within 300 yards to get a good shot. And we were traveling at 150 miles an hour. That's the cruising speed of a B-17 in combat. And they lost that speed. So now they're only doing 200 instead of 350. So they changed their tactics and they went in and started to shoot at the front of the plane, the pilot's compartment. They come up upside down, they had body armor, the 109s, that was their model they flew. And they take a shot at the pilot and then they would go down. Maybe the guy down below in that lower bowl turret could get a shot at it. So they were there. On my second mission, 2 or 3 dozen were there. And if you talked about the Tuskegee Air Force, did they know about the black people that were flying out? Okay. There was a special group of black people that were allowed to fly in P-51s. That's an American plane. And they were over there in our squadron group, and I'd see them go by. They call them red tails. Yeah, if you go to these air shows, sure they do that. Any other questions or anything else you want?
Well, I'll open it up to you guys. Anybody have any specific questions before I go into what we've got here?
What did you eat?
Big pardon?
What did you eat?
Oh, what did we eat?
Okay.
Spam. And we didn't cook it different ways. We just did it always the same way. We sliced it and we hit it. We ate at picnic tables. Before a combat mission, you'd eat at night. And you'd come out of the mess hall, and it was a mess. And you went to a wall, and there was a spotlight on the battle orders. You'd see if you were going to fly tomorrow. Clancy's crew was going to fly. That was my crew. So we'd go to bed. They'd wake us up about 3:30. We lived in tents. And the sergeant would get up, it's your turn to die. I mean, you know, we had a lot of fun talking. So what happens then, we would go down to have breakfast. And after we ate our chow, we'd go to briefing. And there'd be a map up front. And all the crews would be there, maybe several hundred. The officers were down front, the enlisted men, I was an enlisted man, staff sergeant. And they'd tell us where we were going to bomb. Vienna. Vienna was a tough target. Everybody would go, ooh, you know. Then we would go on out, we put our equipment on, we wore heated suits, we wore heated booties, heated gloves, because it was 50 below zero. And when I got back into that tail position, every movement was a measured movement. I had my oxygen mask, I had my throat mic to talk to the crew, I had heated booties, and then my oxygen mask, I really kept an eye on, like as you saw in that picture. And so I just couldn't go anywhere. I had to wiggle out backwards to find out what was happening, but we could always talk to each other. And we did kid around quite a bit. I hope that answers that to some degree. Anybody else? Yeah.
What's black for?
Hmm?
Oh, flag.
Flat.
What is it exactly?
Yeah, it's a shell, and it explodes. And you saw those black clouds up there, and it was deadly. In fact, I would, when I went to that escape hatch I talked to you, it was exploding, always over the target. And I could see it. The first shell it came in bursts of 3 usually. The first one was red, and then it turned to black with powder and all over. And when it hit the ship, you could hear it, like throwing gravel at a tin can. And the plane had concussions. Well, one day, my ball turd gunner wrote a book, so a lot of the stuff you could find in another source to verify it. One day, a shell exploded, it was right behind me, and it blew off the black part of my ammunition box. And there are all these shells laying around there. There was 400 shells in the box here, 400 shells in a box here. And they would come through in aluminum trays that very effortlessly flow into the machine gun, and you could fire them. But you don't want to fire them like you saw in that film, too length of time. I fired one day and exploded. But I picked up a little piece of flak. After that mission, I went rummaging around, so I think I looked at it. I don't know if I brought it. I might not have. Oh, incidentally, here's some cards to pass out to the guys. Yeah, it shows a picture of these sitting on the tail. This is the size of the shell we were shooting. That's a 50 caliber. And deadly at 600 yards. You could shoot at about 1,000 yards, but it would be kind of wasting your. Let's see, I have something here. I could see you found out I couldn't sing, I can't dance either. Anybody else? Yeah.
Can you name what a couple of those medals are for?
Yes, Congressional Medal of Honor. No. Okay, this is the air medal, right here. See this one? After 7 missions, they gave crew members an air medal. After another 7 missions, they give another little medal to put on top of it. This is the Good Conduct Medal. I don't know how I got that. This is the theater of operation that I flew in, and there are battle stars on it for each station that I went to. From northern Italy, we get a battle star in that area. Czechoslovakia, there were targets just south of Germany. We bombed oil targets. The Germans were so industrious. We went to Palestine and destroyed their oil fields, and then they started to make artificial oil. They put coal along with oxygen and made synthetic oil, and they'd hide their oil bases. And when I was there when it was over. My last mission was flown a couple days before the end of the war. And all of Germany was on fire. Anything in Germany was a game target. But in occupied countries, like Vienna, Austria, and some of those other countries, they weren't game because there were civilians down there that they were occupied. The Germans were torching them, all that kind of stuff. So I don't know how we got on that, but finally it was over. We were so happy, and I was waiting around in Italy to get out. And I finally got on a plane in Italy, where the moon is. There was 15 of us in there. They had a stripped down plane. There were some fighter pilots and my crew. And we were heading for home. We went from Italy to Maracaibo, which is in northern Italy, northern Africa. We landed, we went over Casablanca. We headed out to an island in the Pacific called the Azores. It's 1,000 miles out west of Portugal. And I was dealing blackjack. We gambled a lot, because there was nothing else to do. And I was dealing blackjack on the plane, and I dealt a hand to the pilot. I dealt a hand to some of these fighter pilots that were on board. And I dealt a hand to the co-pilot, and I thought, who's flying this aircraft? We're 1,000 miles on. And I looked through the bomb bay, and I could see the automatic pilot was blinking. They had little electronics in those days. They had an automatic pilot that would run the ship. But someone had to be up there to be in the right seat to grab the controls in case we had problems. Well, who's flying? Well, I could see a knee in the left seat sticking. I knew it was South. He was our engineer, and my pilot thought he was a washed-out pilot because he was so good at everything he did. And we got 5 Purple Hearts in my crew, 2 soldiers' medals. We're getting back to this now, and South got the 2 soldiers' medals. You know the guy that I told you about, the Navigator? I found him up, they rolled him away. South was out behind the plane, getting out of this fire. His skin was gone, his hair was gone, his eyes were gone. They were shooting morphine in him. He says that was sure a hot son of a gun in here. I'm not sure that's what he said. Maybe that's it, okay? Thank you, guys.
Give
Thank you for inviting me and everything else. Good luck in your future life.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Also, if you're interested in,
Go ahead, John.
surviving.
Where you going? What night?
Yeah. Anytime.